Okay, good evening everyone. I think we're going to make a start. Well, I'm delighted to introduce you to Professor Madeline Cruice from City St George's, here representing obviously herself but also her colleague and co-chair Lucy Dipper, who will make an appearance in a pre-recorded video. So as you know, both Madeline and Lucy work at City St George's on lots of fabulous research projects, including Luna and Mars and other acronyms that I can't quite remember. But today is talking about their roles as co-chair of Collaboration of Aphasia Trialists, CATS for short. I'll hand over to you, Madeline.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. That's really lovely. Folks, I feel like you've drawn the short straw this evening in just getting me. Normally it's myself and Lucy Dipper because we are quite genuine co-chairs of the Collaboration of Aphasia Trialists. But Lucy will appear on slides and speak to you about this collaboration. So I am a speech pathologist by background. I studied both my undergrad and my PhD in my native Australia. And that's on the east coast of Australia, so at the University of Queensland. And I moved here about 22 years ago. So we'll be entirely speaking from my perspective of being both a researcher and a clinician here. Can I just get a quick show of hands, and this just helps me judge how I describe CATS as we go through tonight, because I want this to be as optimally beneficial for you. Hands up in the room if you kind of know of CATS already and sort of know what we do and might be involved. Only just a few, that's super. Okay, so that really helps me judge how we go forward tonight. Alrighty. So I'm just going to do a bit of a preamble about this particular network, give us some context so we know what we're talking about, and then kind of take you through into the slides. So I'm a professor of aphasia rehabilitation and recovery based in the Department of Language and Communication Science at City St George's, so literally 20 minutes down the road. As a researcher and a practitioner, I've always been quite interested in the big picture for people with aphasia and their families. And I've always been drawn to and interested in breadth, comprehensiveness, how our different elements of our field work together, and in particular, and unsurprising you might imagine, how we operate in different countries, in different cultures, in different healthcare organisations. So I've always been interested in that. I've worked at City for a long period of time, so I've worked my way through sort of our different stages of lecturing and research, and now I have been in a position for about the last 3 or 4 years of predominantly undertaking research. And so I've been in a good position to sort of embrace this kind of role. So Lucy and I both came into this role in February this year, and prior to that, the network was run by Professor Marion Brady. So some of you may be aware of Marion. She's based at Glasgow Caledonian University up in Scotland and a major leader in our field of both stroke rehab and aphasia. As I go through tonight, what I'm hoping that you might pick up from our talk is that collaborating together and working together is better than us going about things singly and about our own ambitions. And so hopefully that comes through as we go. There are QR codes throughout the presentation, and so they're designed to take you straight to websites, straight to mailing lists, research papers, open access, or freely accessible in different ways. So, first of all, I just want to talk about the history of CATS. If we turn our minds back sort of more than a decade, there's a lot of funding available through Europe called COST funding. It's a cooperation of science and technology that basically incentivized researchers, clinicians, different stakeholders or community groups to come together and focus in a particular area. So there were loads of cost actions that were funded. And these were networking communities. So they're not communities to pay for researchers to undertake research. They're communities or networks entirely set up to facilitate international travel. So it was European travel. And so the spirit of this is basically how do we learn best about what we're doing by collaborating with others across our different European countries. And that kind of funding ran for a 5-year time period. That's a very typical cost action. And then following that, we were very fortunate to be funded by the Tavistock Trust for Aphasia. So there was a second, third, and now a fourth round of funding. That funding looks very different. So the first cost action was a very generous envelope that enabled lots, like sort of 200 people to come together once or twice a year for 5 years. The funding envelope that we have now basically supports administration and some project work within the network itself, and some occasional travel to facilitate collaborations. So we're particularly grateful to the Tavistock Trust for Aphasia for their CATS 4 grant. They, of course, are not responsible for anything I say tonight. I'm going to go forward. Okay, we've got these different sections to this evening's presentation. Lucy has done a pre-record for us. She's apologetic she can't be here, and she's going to talk us through sort of CATS and its history a little bit more. And then in particular, she's going to talk about the Aspire project and the Aphasia Therapy Finder. We have made a judgment call that perhaps many people who are here tonight might be quite interested in how you might engage in CATS with respect to clinical service provision. So how might you engage with us for the betterment of your patients and your families and your services? If you are here with a dual or a single research hat on, I will try to make some comments as we go through about what the specific research elements were, or where the benefits might be for researchers. I am then going to talk about one of our current projects that we have through CATS, which is ComStar, and then just very briefly talk about communication partner training in languages other than English, which again is coming out of the collaboration. We're going to finish off with sort of sharing some resources and some opportunities that will be available for you to take up and become more engaged or more involved in CATS. So as I alluded to before, we've been funded since 2014. If you're particularly interested in reading about the history of CATS and what we have done, the kind of literature we've co-authored and produced, the work that we've created, the multilingual, bilingual assessments that have been created for aphasia, can I please encourage you to have a look at our CATS report, okay? All of that information is captured in that particular report. It's freely available. It's not a publication, so it is a lovely, easy read. Okay, one of the benefits of having two co-chairs is obviously you can do some lovely blue sky thinking in our management of CATS as an organisation. But perhaps the second real benefit for CATS at the moment is that I represent clinical discipline and Lucy represents linguistics, so a kind of more pure academic discipline. And it's lovely to both have the practical and the highly theoretical at the head of CATS. So Lucy's going to talk us through Introduction, Aspire, and the Aphasia Therapy Finder.
Okay, so I'm going to start by explaining what the Collaboration of Aphasia Trialists is. So the Collaboration, or CATS, is an international network of multidisciplinary researchers and also research-interested clinicians, because we've recently created a clinicians advisory board. And we encourage anybody who's interested to approach Madeline about joining. So together we're collectively focused on creating better futures for people affected by aphasia. And we do this by supporting research activities, supporting researchers and clinicians, offering advice and resources, and encouraging collaboration across research teams. CATS was originally funded by European cost money from 2013 to 2017, and more recently it's been funded by the Tavistock Trust for Aphasia, and that's between 2017 and the present day. So why was the collaboration created in the first place? Well, it was created to address some historic challenges in aphasia treatment research. So there were challenges in terms of tools, in the sense that there was a lack of research assessment and intervention tools that had been robustly developed, and not all of them were valid, reliable. And there was a problem with cultural appropriateness for the multitude of global languages that are impacted by aphasia. So this limits collaboration and international aphasia research agendas. A second barrier was in terms of perspectives. So aphasia treatment research historically has been carried out in a unidisciplinary way. There are a multitude of disciplines involved, neurology, linguistics, psychology, speech therapy, social science, etc. But their approaches tended to be discipline by discipline, which contributes to a difference in terminology, outcomes, and research paradigms that again limit insights, comparisons, and secondary analysis. There's also been a historic barrier, and one that continues till today, in terms of access for people with aphasia, so access to research and research processes. So this excludes them from informing research prioritization, from self-determination in decisions about research, from participating in research, and from responding and contributing to research as patient advisors or in terms of their involvement. And then a final barrier was a general lack of coordination across aphasia treatment research, which was realised in terms of a lack of coordination with outcome measurement, with participant descriptors, with intervention reporting, among other things. And this hinders secondary analysis, metasynthesis, implementation, and so on. So these are the challenges that CATS tries to face. And we are actually now in the fourth stage of the collaboration. The first three stages of CATS were led by Professor Marion Brady from Glasgow Caledonian University, and Madeline and I stepped up as CATS leads recently to take over CATS 4. So our vision for this phase of the collaboration is to be a global community creating better futures for people affected by aphasia. And our mission is to inspire positive change in aphasia research and in the implementation of evidence-based approaches. We want to achieve this through high-quality aphasia research, leveraging multinational collaboration wherever possible, and with attention to those underrepresented. So this evening, Madeline and I are going to highlight some of the key achievements of CATS in the past 10 years, and also some project work that's still ongoing and some future directions. So this is the overall visual representation of the key highlights from the first 10 years of CATS. And the detail of these highlights is outlined in the CATS 10-year report, which Madeline will point you to when she talks about resources. But just to highlight the range of achievements that the collaboration has managed to have, we've got achievements in terms of languages. So we've got representation across a wide range of languages. We've had some achievements in research innovation, including in terms of methodologies, reporting templates, accessibility and terminology, getting some consistency in terminology. We've got over 300 members from our 41 countries representing 43 languages. And we do have this multidisciplinarity of approach that we were aiming for. And there are a number of impacts detailed in that 10-year report. And I recommend you go and have a quick look through just to see those. But this evening, Madeline and I wanted to just zone in on 4 particular projects so that we can give you some of the detail and richness in those projects. So I'm going to start by describing 2 of them and then hand back to Madeline for another 2. I wanted to talk first about the ASPIRE project. And ASPIRE stands for Aphasia Intervention Description in Research. So our aim here with this project was to review the reporting of aphasia interventions and the reporting of participants in treatment studies, because what we were interested in is whether that reporting was detailed enough. Was it detailed enough for you as researchers to replicate or synthesize the study? Was it detailed enough for you as clinicians to be able to implement the study or to use ideas from that treatment? So in order to achieve this aim, we took the reference lists from 3 recent systematical meta-reviews. One of them was the Cochrane Review. Another was the Canadian Partnership Evidence-Based Review. And the third was RCSLT's aphasia chapter in their resource manual. So we pulled up the reference lists and we inspected those treatment studies with a view to answering these research questions. For this evening, I just want to focus on the final two research questions. So, number 4, what is the quality of aphasia intervention reporting in those studies, and how replicable or implementable are they? So in total, we looked at 93 treatment studies. So this was a team of researchers looking at 93 studies. And what we found was that in terms of the tidier checklist, the reporting quality was pretty good in the sense that on average, 8 out of 12 of the recommended items on the tidier checklist were included. Now, tidier stands for treatment intervention description in rehabilitation. And the checklist items encourage authors to include standardized details each time they report their treatments. And so we found that 8 of those 12 recommended items were on average reported. So we also found a chunk of missing information, and most commonly that missing information was about the setting for where the treatment was carried out. For example, was it done in the NHS setting or in a university setting? There was very limited information about tailoring. So was the treatment designed to be tailored to different aphasia profiles or different treatment goals? People tended not to include this information. There was very little information about modification. So sometimes treatments are modified during a treatment trial for various reasons, but this information was very rarely included. And there was very little information about treatment fidelity, whether it had been monitored or not. And this is about whether all of the therapists in the treatment trial were carrying out the treatment as per the protocol or not. So in conclusion, we said that although treatment reporting was pretty good, it was still insufficiently detailed. And it was insufficiently detailed for a number of purposes: for replication by researchers, for synthesis by researchers, for all of us to understand the detail of these complex treatments, and for clinicians to be able to implement them. So something needs to be done to improve that level of information that's available. So the Collaboration of Aphasia Trialists has taken up the challenge of these conclusions in various ways. And the next project that I'm going to talk about highlights one of the ways we've responded to this finding. So project 2 is about the Aphasia Therapy Finder. And as I've just said, the motivation for this project partly came from the ASPIRE findings about lack of detail in treatment studies, but also came from clinician-reported barriers. So these are surveys of clinicians asking them about what makes it difficult for you to implement evidence-based treatments. And clinicians tend to report time being an issue, but also access to research and the quality of research reporting, so the information available. And then finally, surveys have shown that there's strong clinician support for digital resources to aid them in selecting evidence-based interventions. So this is the gap that the Aphasia Therapy Finder is trying to fill. The aim of the project was to develop an online repository of resources to bridge this evidence practice gap and to aid clinicians in selecting and implementing evidence-based aphasia therapies. We drew on a number of design resources for the Therapy Finder. So we ran focus groups in Australia, the Netherlands, and the United States. We put out a survey internationally and got 176 respondents from 19 countries. 10 of those participants came from developing countries, and 24% of the participants were from countries who have an official language other than English. So we had some representation there internationally. We wanted to include treatments from across the ICF because we didn't want to focus in on any one particular domain. We wanted it to be as broad as possible. And clinicians told us that they wanted detailed instructions, materials, example materials for wherever possible, and video demonstrations wherever possible. So this is the challenge we took up, and to make sure that that detailed reporting was there and also consistent, we used the RTSS to frame our therapy descriptions. So the RTSS is the Rehabilitation Treatment Specification System, and it's designed to encourage authors to have a theoretical framework underpinning their reporting of treatment to improve issues like replicability and implementation. And the three key things that authors are encouraged to include are details about the hypothesized active ingredients of their treatment, very clear information about therapy targets, so what are you trying to improve, and wherever possible, some theorizing about the mechanisms of action. How is this treatment expected or intended to work? So this is the framework we used for phase 1 of the Aphasia Therapy Finder. So phase 1 was carried out in 2022, and this was where we developed the prototype software for what the finder would look like. So we worked with a technology company in order to do this. And on that first prototype version of the software, we included 4 evidence-based aphasia treatments, and then we sent them out to clinicians to ask for their feedback. Overall, we found that the Therapy Finder was accessible and acceptable, and what clinicians really liked was that detailed information about treatments, and they particularly liked videos were one of the key things they particularly liked, but also the different aspects of information included. So I'll show you this in a later slide when I show you how you can search. So this gave us the green light in order to move on to the second phase of the Aphasia Therapy Finder, which we did in 2023. And there we added 21 more treatments. Now we were able to do this by using a team of international researchers. Wherever possible, we used the first author of the treatment, so the person who authored the treatment in the first place, to do the first draft for inclusion in the ATF, and then we used a wider team to edit that and make sure it was readable and accessible, and then the whole team then had a third look to make sure that the information included there was appropriate. These 2 phases were funded by the Tavistock Trust for Aphasia. So the result you can find by going to aphasiatherapyfinder.com, and I urge you to do that if you haven't done already. That's the address that'll take you there, and the QR code will also help you get there. When you arrive on the home screen, you'll be asked to provide an email address and a password, and then you'll be able to access it. So it's a very simple sign-up process. When you get in, you'll find the full range of 25 therapies, and on the homepage they're included in alphabetical order. But of course, what's important is for you to be able to search them and find the information that you want. So there are various ways to filter those 25 treatments down. You can filter by evidence, level of evidence. So level 1 is whether there's been an RCT or a meta-synthesis of the treatment. So you can, if you want really high level, very robust, well-established treatments, you can go for the highest level of evidence. Another way you can search is to look for the intervention target. So are you looking at speech, language, communication, psychological well-being, or so on? You can search or filter by linguistic level. Am I looking for sound, word level, sentence level, discourse level? And you can search by ICF domain as well. And the final way to search is by modality. So in this way, we hope clinicians will be able to easily access the treatments that they're looking for. So we're delighted to say that the Tavistock Trust for Aphasia have kindly funded a third stage of this project. So we've got 3 more years of funding, and this will give us time to routinely review the evidence base so that any new treatments that are created and reach the appropriate level of evidence can be included into the treatment finder so we can keep it up to date. But also, crucially, it's going to allow us to respond to user queries, suggestions, and feedback. So this is another reason why I encourage you to go to the ATF, have a look, try out the therapies, and to send us the feedback. There's information on the finder for sending us feedback, and we'll be able to use these further 3 years of funds to respond to your suggestions. Thank you.
Okay, folks, Lucy's already signposted us to resources, but let me just recap. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got the Aspire paper. It is a single research paper. The first QR code you need library access to. The second one is freely available. It's like the gold, Word version that you can download from our repository at City St George's. It does have all the documentation, so a description. So in the tidy, if we're not familiar with the tidy, it will tell you what's the name of the treatment, what are the goals or the rationale or the theory that underpins elements of the treatment as well as the whole treatment. What do you do? What are the materials? What are the links? Who provides it? How many sessions? So it goes into dose. So it was all those elements there. So if you're looking for a task for somebody who really wants to read about all these different types of therapies that are available, it's a single repository to go to. So very good for students to read in placement and summarise elements, members of our staff team to get really stuck into the different kinds of therapies. So I'd encourage you to go to that. I think also what we learn, with a research hat on from that particular synthesis, is that actually when researchers are writing up their treatments that they've evaluated and implemented, we've got some real gaps. So Lucy talked about the challenges around, or there's no information or little information around tailoring, modification and fidelity. And that might feel a little bit like it has no meaning to us, but actually it's critically important. So tailoring basically means whether or not an intervention is decided at outset, whether or not it should be tailored one particular way for a subgroup of clients or, say, for example, a delivery arm. So whether or not we might take one particular intervention for people who are more or less impaired in their comprehension, or they have a particular profile, or people who are very severe versus very mild. We would tailor an intervention for those different groups. You might tailor for delivery, so it might be delivery one-to-one, might be delivery in a group, might be delivery face-to-face, delivery online. And what it really suggests to us is we need to get a little bit more contemporary in how we think about our interventions and whether or not interventions reach the widest range of people with aphasia or family members in our communities. So what we tend to see at the moment is one standard intervention that doesn't have much tailoring at all. The second thing which we've picked up there, which is a real lack of reporting around fidelity. And this again is quite critical. Fidelity relates to what's the core essence that must appear in those treatment sessions in order for that treatment or that therapy to be considered delivered as intended and understood as intended. And again, what it does is it really forces us as researchers, clinicians who are developing interventions to think a lot more about what the core is of the treatment and make sure that that gets expressed however it is delivered. And I find that quite exciting. So aside from it not looking like a box that gets ticked in a research paper, what it broadly means is let's start thinking more creatively about core elements of treatment that can be delivered, say, for example, by anybody in a clinical team. And by that I mean maybe band 4, band 5, band 6, band 7, or student delivery, HCA delivery. So to think far more creatively about what it is that we're doing. So that's one of the benefits of that. On the right-hand side, the Aphasia Therapy Finder I consider amazing. I studied in the mid-90s in UQ, and the only thing really when you had your aphasia lectures from Linda Worrell was all the different assessments at your disposal. And when we hit, it's not Linda's fault, it's when we hit the kind of aphasia treatment space, it was essentially just a large, big black box. Okay, you might be able to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Some of our therapies that were coming out of the States were really well labelled in the 90s, so people might relate to things like CART or ORT, work from Paige Beeson and Audrey Holland, but we didn't have this branding, we didn't have this conceptualisation of different therapies. We now work and research in a completely different space. And as a lecturer of, hundreds of students, I find this a particularly good resource to point students to because it's got the 25 therapies really well laid out. And again, as a clinical team, if you're looking to skill up in this area, it's got videos online where people can really get a good understanding of the therapy. You obviously can see linked papers that you can read, and it's basically a way of really skilling up in order to provide different kinds of treatment for people with aphasia. So, I'm happy to take questions about that first bit as when we get to the end. Yeah. I'm going to move us now into talking about communication partner training. it's a topic which is very dear to my heart, and this should not surprise you because I'm fundamentally interested in how our folk with aphasia enable to get through their daily life and thrive in what it is that they're doing. So find something meaningful, be engaging, be back in their relationships, back in work, back in study, back in our civic spaces where people should and can be leaders. But obviously that's contingent on the way in which people in society communicate with people with aphasia. And so one of our most obvious interventions that I'm very interested in is communication partner training. So how we train others around people to change their communication skills and enrich that environment. So the precursor for moving into CPT is just to let you know that, again, one of the pieces of work that we undertook as a network was to essentially come together, this was about 2016, and look at all the potential areas in which we might undertake research across the globe and endeavour to try and prioritise those. So yes, you come, with all these things that you might like, but then let's look and see whether or not all these things are already considered, identify the gaps, and basically generate a research agenda to take us forward as a network. So a very kind of organised and focused process. And what we learned out of that exercise was that out of the 30 objectives that we set ourselves, and they are all published in the research agenda paper here. So if anybody is looking for ammunition for their next grant or their next service and business proposal that says these are the things that we should be focusing on, this is a key resource to go to. But out of those 30 objectives, we found that 5 of them relate to CPT. Okay? So they relate to interventions that support those who are communicating with aphasia. So it might be family, but it might also be treating healthcare teams. It might be working in retail and in our community. And so these are the things that we didn't know. So do we know people's unmet needs, in particular communication partners' needs? What are the core elements? So what are those core essence of CPT? How do we know that it's clinically and cost effective? Most importantly, how do we know that it generates long-term gain? It's all well and good to do 6 sessions with somebody, but if that does not stick 6 months, 12 months down the time frame, we're doing the wrong thing in our interventions. We're going about our interventions in the wrong way. So need to be looking at that long-term gain and then thinking also, where does this need to happen across the continuum of care or service delivery for people with aphasia? So I co-lead an NIHR-funded project at the moment called ComStar. I co-lead it with Professor Rebecca Palmer up at the University of Sheffield, and ComStar comes from Communication in Stroke Care and Rehab. It's a health service and delivery research project, so there's a very strong focus on how this changes care for patients in the NHS. And in particular, this call was around access and inclusion in care and rehab. And so all the research and the myriad of people I have worked with in my almost 30 years of practice, people say they feel like they get a bit of a raw deal in their hospital and their rehab spaces when they're kind of communicating with people who are not the speech and language therapists, who have the time and the skills and the resources to sit with them and include them in the conversations and include them in the care. The impetus for this particular project came out of a piece of work we were doing in 2021, where pretty much everyone who came through our study wanted to keep on talking about the healthcare team and not necessarily talking about their family partner. So we felt we needed to do something. So there are 2 different websites you can go to there and read a little bit more. So our pitch really is better communication for all of our health care, staff, students and volunteers across the stroke pathway should result in better care and better rehab. So if somebody who has, the focus of ComStar is much broader than just aphasia. It's stroke survivors who have aphasia, dyspraxia, dysarthria and COGCOM, and the variable mix of all of those together. So those patients and their family members should be able to be more engaged in their care and rehab, and should obviously then lead to things like better outcomes, etc. This is just a disclosure, I have to say. This is obviously this evening's presentation is my own interpretation of what it is that we're doing, and then it's not related to the views of the NIHR. This is the big team that you have here in front of us. There are people based in England, Scotland, and overseas in Denmark and Australia. It has a cross-sector feel to it, so it's based, we have clinical academics in the team as well as pure researchers and academics and clinicians as well. And we sit essentially across 2 sites, one in London and one in Sheffield. We also have a patient and public involvement team. Again, we've got representation across 3 of our nations and a study steering group who keep us in check. So what I basically wanted to do was just introduce you to some of the underpinning rationale and tell you what we're doing and then what the opportunities are in relation to ComStar. So I'm just going to speed up a little bit because I've just spotted the time. So access and inclusion in healthcare is a priority for people. Most of the literature that we were drawing on going into this space speaks about the challenges for people who have aphasia. Okay, so we don't have that same kind of raft of literature for people with dysarthria and COG-COM. But these were the things that we were considering and the reasons that they're important. So we know that through consensus work that's been undertaken with patients and family members across the world, that people want their health professionals to have a better understanding of aphasia, better understanding of education, and better skills in what they're doing. We also know some lovely work from Luca et al. It's a synthesis up here on the right-hand side that is focused on the carers of stroke survivors in the very early stages, so we'd say the first 3 months, that includes carers of people who have aphasia. The carers want a lot more involvement, a lot more recognition in their rehabilitation and want to be heard and informed. So there's kind of lots of motivations and drivers to be undertaking this kind of work. Here in the UK, if we look at our SNAP data, regardless of our opinion of it, Claire Mitchell analysed the data for people on admission to acute settings and noticed that 64% of stroke survivors who are coming through on our SNAP data have a recognised communication need. So people are basically ticking box 9 or box 10, which relates to our aphasia and our dysarthria. So quite a high proportion, perhaps, for us to see in the literature. We also know that in this same context, staff members working in stroke are expected to do these things as part of their as part of an understanding of your role in stroke care and rehabilitation. So I don't know if people are familiar with the SSEF, the Stroke Specific Education Framework. This is a national framework. It comes out of UCLan, so the University of Central Lancashire, very much led by Dame Carolyn Watkins and her team there. And this is a framework that maps the different competencies and skills that each of our different members of our stroke team are expected to have in relation to their role. Okay, it's a very organised framework. It also follows people across the stage of the pathway, so right through from like literally being picked up by paramedics right through to long-term care. It says quite clearly that this is what our stroke staff teams are meant to have. And yet we know that when we speak to our dietitians, our clin psychs, our OTs, our nurses, that many people actually say there's no training available for them. There's no nationally available training, there's no free training, and some of the training that does exist is just not really fit for purpose. It's either something like 10 minutes or it's 2 days, and neither of that dose of training is really important for this space. We also know from our clinical guidelines, both the RCP guidelines earlier in last year in April and the NICE guidelines, that it's part of the SLT's role to coach and train those who are around the person who's had a stroke, okay? And again, these are exactly the reasons that we want them for, so that that person can reach their potential and engage as much as possible in care and rehab. There are other examples from around the world that sit outside of clinical guidelines that again highlight this as a key need. As I said before, when we look at the literature, we certainly don't know what kind of communication skills our full stroke team really have, and we don't know what their training needs are or what they've received. So this has actually inspired a piece of work that has just closed in the ComStar project, and we don't also know what the barriers are, really. There is a single piece of research that comes from Australia that we can draw from that helps us understand some of those barriers, but it is only, again, listening to the voices of speech language therapists or speech pathologists, and it doesn't cover the whole of our stroke team. And really, we're not going to get any further in enabling our clients or our patients to have the best rehabilitation experience unless we start looking at this not only from the point of view of what training is it that people need, but then once they've had that training, what enables them to actually implement and change the way in which they communicate in our very time-pressured environments, and our challenging spaces. When we look at the literature, we can see that this is not a comfortable space for both our staff and for patients and family members. So there's a number of different papers on the left-hand side which basically articulate how staff feel when they are trying to communicate with somebody with aphasia and what the impact is on them. Okay, so they talk about it being time-consuming and hard. They talk about actually feeling quite guilty about the difficulties that they have with patients. They dread going to these patients' bedside, and some of the impact that staff will admit to in these papers is they actually completely avoid or they limit their interactions with these patients in the wards. Okay, that might or might not be your experience, but it's certainly coming through in the literature. Okay. However, what people are really keen for is to change in this space. Okay, so there's a lot of interest here. We see on the right-hand side, again, if we have a look at the literature, this is how patients and families, patients with aphasia and family members feel. Okay, I won't read that through. So what are we doing in ComStar? We have a 3-year project that started in March earlier this year that's actually got sort of 3 strands to it. The first strand was a survey of multidisciplinary stroke staff across the whole of the UK. There may be people present in the audience who actually completed the survey. If you did, thank you so very much. We have been looking through the data. We've discovered a few bots in our data, which is a bit disappointing, but we think we've got about 606 authentic and complete responses from across the UK, which is pretty tremendous. And you'll be hearing more from our project in the next few months as we start to finish analysing the data and start disseminating. But in that space, we asked people about what they had received, what they would like in terms of training, and also what they felt the barriers and facilitators would be to implementing their training, literally in the ward or in the community. So it crosses all the way through from hospital through to community. Our second piece of work that we have going here, the journal articles, is a massive evidence synthesis that I lead with Suzanne Beek, who's based here at UCL. And here we are looking at any of the reports of the development, the delivery and the evaluation of communication skills training that has been published in the English language anywhere in the world. So for those of you who know this space, you'll know that the American teams led by Nina Simmons-Mackey have already published some systematic reviews of communication partner training, which included papers on training with healthcare staff. But in the set of 56, it was quite a narrow number. It was actually only 13 papers. So only 13 studies reporting on healthcare professionals who'd been trained to learn about aphasia. Okay. Since then, there have been another 37 papers that have been published. So it has tripled. It's slightly making us faint at heart because we realised we didn't leave enough time in the timeline to actually work our way through. So we're rejuggling our project a little bit. But essentially, it suggests that there's been a massive investment or interest in healthcare staff's training in the last 8 years since the last review was done. What I hope that you might find exciting out of that space is a novel edge that we are bringing, which is behaviour change theory. So above and beyond looking and interrogating research papers to actually find, well, how long were they trained for and what did they learn about and, what strategies or what resources were the staff given, that's an absolute, that's already taken. We're extracting that information. What we're doing is we're using behaviour change theory and also more broadly implementation theory and implementation science to extract what we think are the key behaviours or the key elements of these training that actually made staff change the way in which they communicate. Because at the end of the day, you can have a lovely knowledge change, you can understand aphasia better, you can feel more positively oriented, so your attitude can change, but what you really want is actual behavioural change. You want that staff member to literally do something different in their communication to make it better for the patient in front of you. So we're bringing that lens to this piece of work, and it will be the first time that's ever happened in the world, and we're excited about that. The final one here is something that we're just undertaking at the moment, is we're interviewing about 10 to 15 stroke survivors and family members and 10 staff to find out what their experience has been of communicating in wards and in the community. And the reason we're doing that is to make sure that we have a right feeling about why we're going into our particular project, and making sure that everyone has a shared understanding of some of the challenges and the facilitators. I am not going to finish, I'm sorry, at 1:15, if that's okay, but if I give a little bit more, it's okay, I will. Okay, lovely. The second year of our project, which will be next March, is co-designing communication skills training with every member of the multidisciplinary team staff represented in our co-design teams, and patients and family members, and working with e-learning for healthcare, who will help us devise an e-learning base module with other components attached to it for national platform delivery in the future. And then the final year will be testing in 4 different sites, 2 around Sheffield and 2 around London, both hospital and community. And again, we'll be coming back and talking about this project, so very happy to be sharing in due course. Why might this be unique, and why might you be interested in it? It's really broad, it's inclusive, it involves all the members of the multidisciplinary team. The grant was 1.1 million, so we are really well enabled to have good discussions with people and map this work out properly. And what we hope to do is really be responsive to the information that we receive from across the sector. So we've had the survey, we're going to have input, there'll be opportunities for people to be involved. And as I said before, just changing your knowledge, we know, doesn't change anything, so we're doing something different here. I'm going to skip over that. Yeah. What we hope is, as we start releasing information as we go through, is that this new knowledge, even though you won't have the training for a couple of years, you'll perhaps be able to use this knowledge in terms of the barriers and facilitators. You'll be able to critique in your own services what those barriers and facilitators are, and think a little bit differently about how you might do some of your local training, because we know across the board speech and language therapy teams are doing this. We also hope that people will be able to take the behaviour change element and implement that. We'll be developing a communication skills checklist. So this is the kind of thing that you would want any healthcare practitioner to be demonstrating in any interaction with a stroke survivor with a communication impairment. And then obviously it will be on ELF, e-learning for health. So we are currently looking to interview some stroke survivors who've got communication difficulties, or family members who speak languages other than English, or identify as having a Black, Asian or mixed background. So if you're sitting in the audience and you think, I might have somebody who I know, please come up and chat to me over a drink afterwards, or email myself or Jean Rutter. We're also looking to identify co-designers. So this is an opportunity for clinicians in the audience. If you're part of the multidisciplinary MDT stroke and you feel like you could either get to London or you could get to Sheffield to take part in co-design sessions from March for 6 months next year, this is an opportunity that's available for you to help us actually design our training. So again, you're welcome to come and chat with me, and also contact our project team. So I probably have about 5 or 6 more slides. Simon, is that okay? Yeah. This represents the 4th element of what I wanted to share today. So ComStar has come out of CATS. It's a multinational team. It's perhaps not as all-encompassing. It's very much based in the UK with a stretch into Scandinavia and across to Australia. But these pieces of work that I want to talk about now, which is quite small by comparison, and that they represent evidence synthesis, come from what we call Working Group 5, where we had a very strong interest in communication partner training, but we're just so acutely aware that as researchers we keep on eliminating or excluding literature which is not published in the English language, and there are various people in the audience who are nodding, and we know that this is a problem, so we need to do things differently. These couple of slides are from Anthony Kong, who is based in Hong Kong. He's a lovely gentleman who has led a massive review of CPT, published in Chinese in all of the Chinese databases. And when they went in to kind of interrogate what CPT looks like in this space, he basically found two kinds of treatment approaches. The first is as we know it, which is training a communication partner, like a family member or a nurse, to communicate better with people with aphasia. But the second is something that, the first one there, sorry, is called task shifting, which is a very different piece of literature, and it's not something that we've traditionally seen under the umbrella of CPT. And this is where family members or other members of the team are being trained essentially to deliver speech and language therapy. Okay, so a little bit of a broad stretch of a CPT definition, but some really lovely findings coming out from there that we don't see in our English literature. So a lot more emphasis on acute and in the early stage, so a lot more being delivered there. Probably the most interesting thing for me culturally, which emerges from this particular paper, is their commentary around an individualistic versus a collectivist culture. And this manifests in the outcome measures that have been chosen in that kind of literature, where in the work that he was looking at, there's much more emphasis on how members of a dyad feel they are satisfied with that particular space versus individualistic measures of well-being or confidence, or did my communication get better? So a big shift, and probably more in tune with the interactional nature of communication. There's also a relatively new piece of work in Portugal. This looks very different. There's only 4 CPT studies there. But if you've got some Portuguese patients and you think you might want to actually come and look at this literature, or you want to get a little bit inspired about literature that sits outside English, I encourage you to have a look at that particular paper. Okay, I'm on the homeward run now. This should only be a couple of minutes. I'm sorry for going over. If you're a clinician in the audience, Lucy and I had a bit of a think about sort of, what you might sensibly get from CATS, or what indeed you might even direct your students to. So all of this information is freely available on the CATS website. The first one is information about aphasia that exists in many different languages. Okay, so you can download the information sheets. It's very clearly labelled by the different languages, and that might be really useful for your current patients or family members in the communities that you're working. The second one is a bit of an overview of the different tools that have been developed to assess aphasia in different languages. And there's been different approaches here, but overall the main focus in CATS, and it wasn't really intended, is the translation and adaptation of the comprehensive aphasia test. So we've got CATS and CATS. And then very finally, we do also now host Participics. For whatever reason, the link was not working properly, so I have just actually put up the Aphasia Institute link. If people are not aware, this is their massive portal that previously we would have paid a lot of money to purchase. They're now available online, and it's free. So you can choose whatever images you would like to customize for whatever it is that you're creating in your clinical setting. For researchers sitting in the audience, again, we've got a number of different things that might interest you. So there are templates for how you make your information sheet and your consent form accessible, and they, again, can be downloaded. They're free of charge. We've developed video abstracts, so how you might create something that's more accessible for your research. So as a lead researcher on a paper, you might make something accessible for people with aphasia and their family members to understand it. And then very finally, if you're really interested in feasibility or definitive randomized controlled trials, there is a massive portal of information under the Trials for Aphasia panel that walks you through all aspects of the decision making that you will make in that particular space, with signposts to things which are particularly important for aphasia rehabilitation. So my final pitch here is you might have come here this evening wondering what CATS is about. If you're interested in learning more, you're really welcome to join us with a specific focus in different working groups. So there's ones that look at assessment, there's ones that look at prognosis, there's ones that look at treatment, there's ones that are broader, there's a working group in implementation. So you can sign up to take part in that working group, or you can just be a general member of CATS, and that way you receive information, newsletters, you can hear about opportunities, and we have an annual meeting every year, which is free of charge to come. You might also be really interested in joining the CAB or the Clinicians Advisory Board. We are very interested in having more clinicians involved in the kind of agenda setting and the priority setting work that we're doing, and in obviously in the planning, the development and the evaluation of research. Thanking you, and I'm so very sorry for running over.
I think we can all agree that you are completely forgiven. Thank you very much. But does anyone have any questions? I will run the microphone over to you.
Thanks a lot. That was a great talk. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the fidelity issues, because for me it's almost like a study within a study. I mean, you can sort of log what has been done, but when it comes to complex interventions, and I take your point about tailoring, but I think almost all interventions, certainly the ones we do, are all tailored. So like observing a complex intervention like therapy and like recording it on a video and then transcribing that takes, I don't know, many times longer than to actually deliver that therapy session itself. And I know you can just do a small portion, but can you say a little bit about how you think that should really go and whether people should be putting in grants with quite a large portion for looking at that?
Okay. Oh gosh, Alex, that's quite a big question. I think I have an opinion here which is perhaps not very popular, so I'll say it first and then I'll come to your question. I think I feel quite fortunate for where I sit at the moment, that I sit in spaces which are not our therapeutic space, where there are very different kinds of interventions being discussed, delivered, evaluated, implemented. And I suppose I have been challenged by the incredible tailoring that we appear to do in our profession. And I just find myself questioning whether or not that is a good thing. Obviously, as a quality of life practitioner, I completely sign up for person-centered care. So you would never want to give something to somebody that's inappropriate for their needs. But I find myself sitting here going, there are so many challenges for our clients, for our whole community. Like if you shift your paradigm up from looking at individuals and we look at communities and societies instead, and we look at the kind of communication needs or the poor level of understanding that exists generally, for me there's literally so many things I feel like we should be better spending our time on. And for that reason, I then find myself coming back thinking, I would almost like us to be more programmatic. I would like us to have these packages that are really clearly appropriate for the majority of people's needs, rather than us constantly doing, uber detailed individualistic assessment and uber detailed individual treatment planning. I can't see that being sustainable long term. And I feel like we should be doing so many different things with our time. So that's my backdrop for responding to your question. So I'm kind of thinking there should be more programmatic work. There should be a lot more kind of a priori thinking about how this intervention might hit a broader range or be delivered, heavens above, across clinical groups. We are forever siloing aphasia and dementia, and it makes no sense to me broadly at the end of the day. So how could you get commonality happening? And so that's when, then for me, things like tailoring are really important, and then the kind of monitoring of fidelity are really important. We were actually just having a conversation recently at university about the expense of fidelity assessment in our grant submissions and how popular that is or not. If I'm honest, I don't think we've been truly transparent about how we've achieved it within grants. I think quite often we've bolted on, research students, master's students, PhD students around the side, so it's kind of been free labour that is bolted on in order to achieve that. Can you say a little bit more about specifically what you wanted me to focus on?
No, I think you've answered it. It's the level of depth. I mean, if it was a drug study, you just have to check, has someone taken it? Is it in their blood? Is it in their urine?
Yeah.
But with complex interventions, as you say, it's what level of, is a timetable okay? Like they had a session on this, they did, I don't know, they worked on conversation partner training for an hour, or do we need to know exactly what happened in that session?
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you for saying that, because it just reminded me again. I think one of the privileges is I sit in a space with an implementation science behaviour change person who thinks about their interventions very differently. And we were discussing something, I think it's called the Dynamic Sustainability Framework. It's yet to really reach our literature and certainly to reach our consciousness. But the impetus behind that is we have this sense of these highly individualized and constrained treatments, which then are not practical for implementation. So even then, say, for example, they go to efficacy, they go to effectiveness, you see they can't be implemented. And actually there's a call to think very differently about where you start at the beginning to make them simpler in the first instance, to make the fidelity assessment much more simpler, such that clinicians who are delivering quite literally just need to hit 5 things as opposed to like the 25 things, in the knowledge that your community and your service will be different to your community and service up in Scotland, etc. And as long as you get the core, you have to give your clinicians the flexibility to do that. Otherwise, you just don't get stuff implemented. And I forget the name of the acronym, but there's a really well-known physio treatment, I think it's GRASP or something, which we know has been really well studied, but is never implemented as it's meant to and this is one of the main reasons. It's just far too complex. So I think what I'm saying is, I think we need to go simple with many fewer things, maybe a little bit more than just a timetable or just CPT, but, core essence, and then give people the freedom, because otherwise the finding is that people don't do it. Lovely, thank you.
I mean, just to comment on that, I mean, so that was the point of the tidier checklist, was to be able to kind of hit a central spot and go, if you're kind of in this area, you are doing the right intervention, and then acknowledge that you're going to have variance around that.
Yeah.
So that was always the point of something like tidier. It wasn't to tie people down to incredibly specific level of detail in particular interventions. Because if you change things too much, if you individualise your treatments too much, you end up doing something different.
Yeah.
And then we won't know where we are. So I agree with both of your points. Anyway, that wasn't my question. So you mentioned something about national clinical guidelines.
Yeah.
And then you were also talking about, Lucy was talking about the 25 treatments that you have on the website.
Yeah.
So is there a gap between those treatments, your 25 treatments,
Yeah.
and what's in the national clinical guidelines? I mean, there must be.
Absolutely.
And is CATS, or how is CATS going to close that gap? Because ultimately you want these, and it kind of ties into the previous conversation, you want your treatments to be in the national clinical guidelines. I mean, obviously going to hit the whole problem about not being able to implement it because not having any staff, but that's a different set of questions.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, Nick, where do we start? Yes, you're completely right. So the national clinical guidelines, as we look at them for, say, for example, aphasia or dysarthria, they look very different for people who don't have this fine-grained memory of these guidelines, but I unfortunately do. They look very different, say, for example, to the mode of functioning, the physiotherapy specifications, where it's really, really clear about what you should be doing and implementing. Well, definitely clearer by relative comparison. Ours say lovely broad things. I think I still had it on the slide, which is, to provide treatment for language and communication up to this point, or to coach and train. There is no specification that says do VNS, do SFA, do CART, do ORT, do supported conversation with aphasia, trademark from Aphasia Institute. We're not at that level, and you're completely right that this represents an opportunity. That's a very good question. In the collaboration, one of the very dynamic groups is Working Group 4, which is the treatment group where both Aspire and the Aphasia Therapy Finder has fallen out of that group, come from that group. One of the major challenges I think that faces us is the quality of the evidence that we have to date around some of the interventions, and them being at the right level for much broader testing. So there's ambitions within the group for, quite not only national but international clinical trials, say for example UK and mirror sites in Australia, or platform trials where we're looking at different interventions against each other. And I must confess that that particular group have spent ages discussing what kind of intervention would be ready at that stage, and they haven't been able to choose between one or two particular interventions that come close to having the right level of evidence. So I think my answer to your question is maybe a couple-fold. It's for us as a collaboration Initially, these are English articulated treatments. They don't include treatments in other languages. Obviously, a lot of the German treatments and the Netherlands treatments are in there, but they're reported in English, so they're included, and they've got good high-quality research. It's probably progressing the quality of the evidence up and then testing that more programmatically, and then off the back of that being able to, I don't want to say just hoik it straight into a clinical guideline, but because you need to look at the implementation components to it, otherwise we'll just have wonderful evidence-based treatments that can't get delivered on the ground and that are not fit for purpose with our different communities. But to really take that path of testing or path of evaluation, and I think maybe I don't quite know how to say this. I was going to say there's some spotlights in the guidelines which suggest a couple of things. So one of them quite obviously is digital interventions, and that's quite clearly articulated. And there's obviously also suggestions in the clinical guidelines as well of things that might or should be done. And the ICAP is one particular example going forward. I'm not completely sure I've answered your question fully though, but yeah.
Any other questions, or shall we stop? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Madeline. Thank you so much for coming, and maybe another round of applause.